Welcome to the Laverne Church of the Brethren's weekly audio message. Here at the Laverne Church of the Brethren, we create a Christian community called by Christ to be inclusive, caring, and peace-minded. We affirm that people of any race, ethnic identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, age, economic status, faith tradition, or life situation are welcome in our congregation. We believe in compassionate service, stewardship of creation, respect for diversity, and nonviolent reconciliation for differences among all people, nations, and faith traditions. We claim no creed but the New Testament as exemplified by the life of Christ. We strive to follow the way of Jesus. And through these efforts, we seek to grow ever closer to the mind and heart of God. And now let us ground ourselves as we enter into today's message.
Randy, thank you for the offertory music this morning. It was beautiful as always. I remember hearing you play, I think it was at the Alternative Christmas Fair or something, and you had done a James Taylor kind of piece, and I said to Amanda, gosh, I just love it when Randy does something or that James Taylor sings. He does that so well. And Amanda gave me this look, and I said, you don't know who James Taylor is, do you? It nearly broke my heart, and I could see people singing along with you as you were singing, and it probably would break their hearts too. In the beginning of his book, The Ancient Church as Family, scholar Joseph Hellerman comments upon the remarkable expansion of the early Christian movement. He asks, how could a small Judean sect arising in a province located at the easternmost fringes of the Roman Empire, expand its ranks steadily for almost 2 centuries in the face of often sporadic and local, sometimes consistently legislated opposition? It's an interesting question. Hellerman notes that some scholars suggest that it was the simplicity of the Christian message with its clear path to safety and salvation that was so attractive to many. After all, they lived within a religious environment that included a plethora of religious cults with a multitude of gods, goddesses, and other supernatural forces that could be confusing, overwhelming, and uncertain. Some of the gods were fickle or even downright destructive. Historian Robin Lane Fox writes, Christianity held out to the disinherited the conditional promise of a better inheritance in another world that was attractive. In other words, Christianity held an ideological appeal within an eclectic religious environment that often espoused an unseen world of malevolent supernatural beings. If we're honest with ourselves, we must admit that ideology alone is often a tough sell in terms of claiming one's total life commitment. After all, we don't live in isolation with just an array of ideas. Rather, our ideologies are intricately woven into the social fiber in which we live. To understand the lore of early Christianity and why it grew so much, so fast, we need to consider the ways that it interacted and interfaced with its social context. What did the early Christian communities look like to outsiders? What were relationships like between community members? How did they function? In thinking about these questions, the concept that kept coming to my mind in terms of the early church was that of a rogue family. A family that somehow violated commonly held ideas about how things should be done, how people should interact with one another, or what they should look like. A rogue is a great concept to roll around in your head. The dictionary that I consulted had two interestingly different definitions for rogue, the first being a criminally dishonest person, and the second, a playfully mischievous person. It seems a peculiar contrast, the impish frolicker and the devious criminal. I suppose that the two share a certain looseness with basic protocols of propriety, a common willingness to push against the boundaries, to challenge the rules, and take a swipe at the predictability of convention. Still, it does seem odd to use the same word to describe both a playful person and a dishonest criminal. At what point, then, does the mischievous rogue become a criminal rogue, or vice versa? Well, one thing we do know is that the early Christian movement pushed back against commonly held views of what made for a good and moral family or life. While not denigrating familial relationships, on numerous occasions, Jesus challenged the primacy of traditional blood relationships, suggesting that marriage and kin ties took second place to the urgent need to prepare for what he refers to as the kingdom of God. From the Gospel of Mark this morning, we read, "Then his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, 'Your mother and brothers and sisters are outside asking for you.' And he replied, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And looking at those who sat around him, he said, 'Here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother.'" Wow. When you stop to think about it, you realize that Jesus is redefining what it means to be family to and with one another. For Jesus, family is not about blood and kinship, but rather about discipleship and choice. You could choose to be a part of this Jesus family by doing the will of God, by choosing a commitment to what Jesus referred to as the kingdom of God. And what did that kingdom look like? What was that passion? For Jesus, the kingdom of God is about the indwelling of justice, the practice of love, the upside-down world where the last are first and the first are last, where the meek inherit the earth, where the hungry are fed, the sick are made well, the merciful find mercy, where peacemakers are called the children of God and the lowly are raised up. This is dangerous rogue stuff. In the book of Acts, we learn a little bit more about what it meant to be a part of this rogue family, this early Christian movement. In Acts 2, we read, "They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as they had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the the favor of all the people, and the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. In a society that was stratified and structured around the patriarchal family, this kind of community and functioning was alarming. It flew in the face of the status quo and, if unchecked, would provide a very real threat to the prevailing social order. At least, that's how those in positions of power might see it. For anyone who may have felt excluded by the systems of status or the structures of oppression or the practices of exclusion, this was good and exciting news. You could find belonging in this community of believers, this family, regardless of your status in the world, or your past, or your gender, or your tribe, or your race, or your wealth. In the eyes of the powerful and elite, this rogueness was not mere mischief. Rather, it was dangerous and perhaps even criminal in nature. It's no wonder when you think about all that was at stake and the many dynamics, it really should come as no surprise that the early church was persecuted and also that it grew. This past year, Lori Schreiner preached a sermon here about what it takes to be a thriving church. She noted the importance of feeling and building a sense of belonging. What makes a congregation thrive and grow, she said, is in no small measure attributable to its ability to help people feel as though they belong, as though they have a place and a purpose here, sharing meals, praying together, caring for one another, learning together, sharing a commitment to something bigger, helping one another, offering justice, love, acceptance, mutuality, welcome. These are the building blocks of belonging, of being family together. This is what the early church understood and, more importantly, practiced. I'm smitten by this concept of the church as a rogue family, where by choice we come together to do the holy mischief that builds and sustains the kingdom of God, a place of belonging, of healing, of justice, of love, of peace. Becoming a rogue family. That's what we're about when we wrestle with what it means to be an anti-racist church or a Matthew 25 movement congregation that tends to the most vulnerable, or an open and affirming congregation that welcomes queer people. It's what we are doing when we share meals together, open our homes to one another, explore hard issues of living and being together, reach out to neighbors, embrace a stranger, reject the lures of self-serving power and wealth. It is what we are demonstrating when we bump against the boundaries of the powers and principalities with their love of privilege and status, with a radical message of peace and reconciliation, justice and hope. Our closing hymn this morning is one that reflects the potential of what it means to be a rogue family, and I think it's familiar to many. It's called "For Everyone Born, a Place at the Table." It was written by a New Zealand woman named Shirley Arena Murray back in 1998, and she modeled her hymn after the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights that begins with the statement, All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Shirley Murray connects with that spirit within her hymn, calling for us to create the kind of justice and joy that will bring delight to God. For Murray, the concept of a place at the table is her metaphor for the kingdom of God, a world where everyone has a place and everyone is welcome. Now, what's interesting to me is that in her original hymn, Murray names some specific categories in her verses. She speaks of women and men having a place at the table, young and old, just and unjust, and also gay and straight. And interestingly and ironically, given the theme of the hymn, the publishing company took out the verse that mentions gay and straight. That's the pushback of the system, isn't it? That place where rogue as mischief becomes rogue as criminal. The status quo exerts its privilege to keep a whole community invisible and excluded. So now if you see this hymn in almost any hymnal, it will more than likely not include the verse about gay and straight. Indeed, I've been to several worship services of LGBTQ supportive congregations where they would have these beautiful services and sermons promoting inclusion, only to close with this hymn not realizing that it was actually missing the verse about gay and straight. It's just a reminder that as a rogue family, we have to keep working at it, don't we? We have to keep alert, invested, aware. So the text that we will be using for the hymn this morning is a more recent, approved alternate version that hopefully adds a more wider and inclusive dimension. Who are my mother and my brothers? Who is kin to me? Jesus asks. And he looks at those gathered around him and he says, whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother, my sibling, my beloved, my kin, my family. Across the centuries, Jesus continues to invite us into this wonderful, wholly mischievous, welcoming, and beautiful rogue family, where together we get to be creators of justice and joy, compassion and peace. What a beautiful gift. Welcome home. Thanks be to God.
We're so glad that you listened to the message today. If you're looking for an open and affirming, peace-loving, and justice-seeking congregation, consider visiting us for in-person worship on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. We'd love to meet you.